Okay, so let's just jump right in. If you think about it, how many massive, world-changing places are named after some regular guy? Not a king, not a general, not some huge historical figure. We're talking about an entire hemisphere named after a map maker.
It really is maybe the most successful branding story in all of history. The entire Western Hemisphere, North and South America, gets its name from just one person, Amerigo Vespucci.
So today, we really want to unpack how this man, basically through science and logic, proved that a whole new continent existed, a continent that pretty much everyone else, including Columbus, thought was just, the eastern edge of Asia. It's a story about realizing the whole map was wrong.
And Vespucci's background is so key to understanding how he did it. He was born in Florence, Italy, back in 1454. He came from a really well-known, well-connected family, which meant he got this incredible education. He was studying things like astronomy, physics, and, most importantly, the art of map-making cartography.
But he didn't start out as an explorer. His first job was in finance. He's working for the Medici family.
Who were basically the biggest bankers in Europe at the time.
Right. And this gave him a super practical education in, global trade, shipping, logistics. And that's important because finding new sea routes to Asia was the biggest business venture of the era.
Exactly. And that job is what eventually took him to Seville in Spain, which was the absolute hub for all Atlantic exploration. His background in finance, plus his knowledge of the stars and navigation, it made him the perfect guy to help prepare ships for those huge, dangerous, and very expensive voyages across the ocean. He went from calculating profits to actually charting the courses.
And I guess at some point, his curiosity just took over. He decided he needed to see these places for himself. So that takes us to the voyages that really changed the map.
It does. Starting in the late 1490s, he joins these voyages, mostly paid for by the Spanish crown. His job wasn't really about planting a flag. It was more about systematic exploration. He was meticulously charting the coastlines of what we now call South America.
And that's a huge coastline. We're talking thousands and thousands of miles, right? He was sailing way deeper into the unknown than anyone else had really documented before. Which brings us to his big advantage, his scientific approach. What made his notes so much better than everyone else's?
It all came down to his mastery of celestial navigation. See, a lot of sailors back then used something called dead reckoning.
Dead reckoning, what's that?
It's basically an educated guess. You track your speed, you track your direction, and you sort of estimate where you are. But over thousands of miles.
The errors just get bigger and bigger.
Exactly. The errors become massive. But Vespucci was different.
How so? What was he doing?
He was a specialist in using the stars, the sun, and the moon. He had instruments to measure their positions, and he used geometry to calculate his precise longitude and latitude. So he wasn't guessing. His positions on the map were far, far more accurate. They were scientific.
And he was basically a data collector, writing down everything he saw, the geography, the specific plants, the animals. He was gathering all these little data points that were about to completely shatter the old worldview.
Well, and that realization didn't happen all at once. It really grew out of a deep sense of doubt. You have to remember, even after Columbus, most people in Europe thought these new lands were just islands off the coast of Asia, the Indies.
But Vespucci started to see that it just didn't add up. The scale was all wrong. If this was Asia, it was way bigger than anyone like Marco Polo or any ancient travelers had ever described.
The geography just didn't fit. But the really deep proof wasn't just the size of the place. It was biological. And this brings us to his most revolutionary idea.
Which was?
That this landmass could not possibly be Asia.
And how did he know?
He looked at the plants and the animals. Everything he was logging in his notebooks was, well, it was completely unique. Totally different from anything ever documented in Asia, Europe, or Africa.
So you're saying there were no tigers, no elephants, none of the animals people associated with Asia?
None. He was looking at a totally separate ecosystem. So you combine that fact, the unique life, with the vast distances he'd sailed and the different climates he'd encountered. He could only come to one logical conclusion.
This was an entirely separate continent.
And he gave it a name that changed the world.
Mundus Novus.
Mundus Novus. In Latin, it means new world. I mean, just think about how shocking that phrase must have been. He wasn't just saying he found a new island. He was declaring the existence of a fourth continent that no one in the ancient world ever knew existed.
And that's a huge challenge to the establishment, especially to someone like Christopher Columbus, who went to his grave believing he'd found the Indies. How did Vespucci's idea, which was just based on observation, win out?
The answer is the printing press. Vespucci wasn't just a great navigator, he was an amazing writer and communicator. He could explain these really complex geographic ideas with incredible clarity.
So his letters got published.
They didn't just get published, they became bestsellers. His letters, describing these giant rivers and endless forests and the unique people he met, they were translated into multiple languages and printed over and over.
So his ideas spread much faster than anyone else's.
Infinitely faster. An earlier explorer's report might sit in a royal archive for years, but Vespucci's ideas were suddenly available to scholars and scientists everywhere. His ideas went viral 15th century style.
So he's got the discovery, the scientific proof, and his idea is popular. Which brings us to the big finale.
Oh.
How does Amerigo get his name on half the planet?
For that, we have to thank a German cartographer named Martin Waldseemüller.
Okay.
In 1507, Waldseemüller is putting together what he wants to be the most up-to-date, comprehensive map of the entire world. And like every other scholar in Europe, he's read Vespucci's letters.
And he's impressed?
He's more than impressed. He's convinced. He completely buys Vespucci's argument that this is a separate continent, and he feels it needs its own name to distinguish it from Europe, Asia, and Africa.
So he just decides to name it after Amerigo.
He proposes it right there on the map. He suggests naming the new land America in honor of Amerigo Vespucci, who he saw as the true discoverer of the new continent.
And there's that little detail about the name itself, right? He changed it slightly.
That's right. He chose the feminine version, America, instead of the masculine Amerigo. And that was probably deliberate. It was a tradition. The other continents, Europa and Asia, had feminine names.
So that 1507 map is the first time the name America ever appears on anything.
The very first time. And it was a huge, widely distributed map. So even though Waldseemüller himself apparently had some second thoughts later, it was too late. The name just stuck. People started using it.
And it didn't just stick to South America. As explorers kept going, they realized the northern landmass was connected.
Exactly. So map makers just started applying the name America to the whole landmass, to the entire New World. And eventually that led to the continents we know today, North and South America, both sharing a name that came from that one map.
It's incredible. But beyond just the name, let's talk about the specific details he recorded. What were some of the observations that just blew European geographers away?
Well, first was just the sheer scale of the South American coast. He documented how it just kept going and going, but crucially, he sailed past the mouth of the Amazon River.
And what was so important about seeing a river?
It was the amount of water. He noted the immense volume of fresh water pouring into the Atlantic. For geographers back in Europe, that was proof.
Proof of what?
Proof that a river that massive had to be draining a truly enormous landmass, much, much larger than any island. That river was physical evidence that this had to be a continent.
And then there was the proof from the sky, the celestial proof.
Yes. He observed that the constellations you could see in the southern hemisphere were completely different from the stars they knew in Europe. He described seeing what we now know as the Southern Cross.
And that's more than just a cool observation, it's actual scientific data. Why?
Because it's hard proof that you've crossed the equator and entered a completely new hemisphere of the globe. His observations of the stars gave future map makers the hard data they needed to place the New World accurately on a global map. You can't argue with the math of the stars.
He also wrote a lot about the people he encountered, the indigenous peoples.
Yeah.
What did he have to say about them?
His journals are full of details about their customs, their languages, their societies. He often wrote about their knowledge of the local environment and their excellent health, how they lived in harmony with the world around them.
And he traded with them.
Yes, the explorers would trade things like small mirrors and bells for food. But his descriptions really gave Europe its first detailed look into the complex societies that had been there for thousands of years.
And all this knowledge had a practical effect, right? It wasn't just about drawing maps. It made sailing safer.
Absolutely. By championing and teaching celestial navigation, he helped make Atlantic crossings much more efficient. It was less about guesswork and more about science, which meant fewer ships got lost.
And he became a teacher himself, passing this knowledge on.
He did. He eventually settled in Seville, and his role shifted from being an explorer to being, well, an administrator.
Which leads to his final, very powerful job. In 1508, the King of Spain makes him the pilot major. That sounds important.
It was incredibly important. It wasn't some honorary title. It was a position of immense strategic power.
What did he do?
As pilot major, he was personally in charge of checking every single map the Spanish made. And no pilot was allowed to sail to the Americas without passing a tough navigation exam that he himself designed. He basically became the gatekeeper of all of Spain's secret geographic knowledge.
We should probably touch on the controversies, though, because not everyone agrees that he was this great hero of discovery.
That's true, and it's a fair point. For centuries, some historians have questioned his claims. They've debated whether he actually led all the expeditions he said he did, or if some of his famous letters were exaggerated by publishers just to sell more copies.
But even with all those debates, the core facts remain.
They do. His role in providing the scientific proof for a new continent, and of course in the naming of the Western Hemisphere, that's just an undeniable part of history. He died in Seville in 1512, having completely redrawn the world map.
In the end, Vespucci's real genius was using logic and observation to see what was right in front of him, to prove that the New World was not Asia.
He redefined the entire planet.
And his legacy is right there on every globe, every map you look at. It's a reminder that sometimes a powerful idea, one that's backed up by good evidence, can be more powerful than tradition or politics. It's not often a map maker gets to name half the Earth.
See you next time. Good luck with your studies.